Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning from wherever you are joining us from today. Welcome to a Microsoft Reactor live stream event. My name is Kaylee, and I'm the event planner for the Redmond Reactor Space. Before we kick off the session, I have some housekeeping rules I'd like to run through. Sorry about that. Please take a moment to review our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary and please remain professional and on topic. If you would like to refer back to today's session, you can do so on our Reactor YouTube channel after today's live stream. This session will run for about 1 hour. Please submit your questions through the chat and we will try to answer as many as possible. Additional learning links will be added to the chat during the session. It is now time to begin the session, so I will hand it over to today's speaker.
Hi, Waldek. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Aisha.
It's so exciting to be back. We're over 1 week now, and I see everyone is hacking in the Hack Together repo. There's exciting discussions, and we are here to answer some questions. It's an exciting session. So thanks, everyone, for joining the session. We are here with the experts. They're not on screen yet. We want to give you a brief information about Hack Together. If you're new, don't worry about it. We will just give you a brief info and we will guide you where you can learn more. And then we will have all of our experts from Microsoft to answer all of your questions. Today's agenda, first off, we will cover the overview of Hack Together. It's not going to take long, but we will give you all the required information. And then we will have the Ask the Expert sessions and get to know Microsoft Graph team a little better. So Waldek, what are we doing today? And the overview of Hack Together, can you ramp up quickly about Hack Together and give us more info?
Totally. Right. So we started the hackathon last week on March 1, and we started that with a keynote, right? Where we saw Scott Hanselman and Nina Arenas show us what Microsoft Graph is and why would you use .NET to build apps connected to Microsoft Graph. So what you can do, what you can achieve, and what data you can get from the Microsoft Graph. And then the next day on March 2, we saw how you can use the different tools like Graph Explorer to explore the data that is on Microsoft Graph and how you can bring the data then next to your first .NET-based app. Right, today we are on day 8th of the hackathon, March the 8th, and it's so cool, right? We are only 1 week in, and we've already seen so many cool projects and hacks. It's insane. Like we've seen even a person improve our own SDK. How cool is that, right? So all of that is in. There's a ton of engagement questions. So it's really cool to see everybody engaging with us and asking us tons of stuff. So we got a pile of questions to ask the experts. And if there's anything more, please use the chat to ask them. We've got some great folks for you here today live who are here to ask anything you would like to ask about building apps using Microsoft Graph and .NET. First things first, though. We mentioned it is a hackathon, right? And it wouldn't be one if we didn't have some cool prizes for you to get. We said we started the hackathon last week on March 1. It's still not too late to join. You can join us anytime. You can join us even on the last day itself. Register, submit your hack, and you are eligible for prizes. How you would go about it? Go to this link that you see on the screen, aka.ms/hack-together/register. It's a short form you go through. You put in your name and also address. We want to know when you win a prize, where to send that prize to, right? And that's it. And you are good to go. Now we have a repo with tons of info, templates for apps, easy things to start. It's also a place where you can ask us anything whenever you need help, whenever you're looking for another person to hack with. That is the place to be. finally, prizes, right? We have some really cool prizes to give away to the winners. And the cool thing is you can enter the hack by yourself or as a team. And if you join the hackathon as a team up to 4 people, everybody on the winning teams will get the prizes you see on the screen. So it's really worth your while, not to mention you will learn a thing or two that you might be able to use for work. How cool is that? So with that, like that summarizes the recap. I guess it's about time to hand it over to our experts who are waiting here for us to ask them the questions you asked them.
Awesome. Let me bring everyone in. Hi, everyone. And I'm
Hey,
going to
folks.
remove our slides. Yes, we are so crowded today, but it's good to have lots of experts so we can answer so many questions. And I removed the slides, but actually we want to have some intro from our team because we want to get to know the Graph team and also .NET Advocacy. Let me have the
Bring
slides
my
back
screen.
in.
Perfect.
Yeah, so before jumping into the questions, let's have our experts introduce themselves.
So, hello everyone. My name is Maisa Hissi. I was here with you in the last session we had in the Hack Together. For those who are watching live today, I'm based in Brazil and I work in the Microsoft Developer Experience team in the Microsoft Graph product.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brian T. Jackett. I'm on the Microsoft Graph team. I specifically work with the customer and partner experience team. So we work with a lot of our folks who are building applications, integrating with Microsoft Graph, getting to know all the kind of ins and outs of what's available, what kind of solutions you can build with this. I've done a couple different community things in the past. There's an original thing called the 30 Days of Microsoft Graph. That's the most recent one. This was actually about 5 years ago. A good way for people to get introduced to what's available on Graph and how you can get ramped up on things. So really looking forward to talking to people and answering questions as they come in today.
Hi everyone. My name is Andrew Mondi. I'm a software engineer in the Microsoft Graph DevX team. Primarily work on the different SDKs, Java, .NET, and the rest. I'm looking forward to answering your questions and help you out wherever we can.
Hello, everyone. This is Justin. I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft here, and I'm actually from South Korea. It's now 1 a.m. here. It's completely midnight, and I'm really trying to sound down because everyone is sleeping around myself. So I don't want to get complaint from my neighbors. Anyway, so welcome to this session. I'm really happy to talk to you.
We will be asking questions very quietly.
This is pretty cool. We shared where we're joining from. You see, we have a team across the globe. I'm joining from Dubai and Waldek is joining from Netherlands. We have a coverage of Asia and Americas, and everyone is covering one region at least. We want to learn where you are joining from in this session. Please put it in the chat. We want to see who is listening this conversation from which country. We want to get to know you as well, what you are doing in Hack Together. If you're a part of it, what is your project? Let us know more in the chat. So, shall we get started?
Definitely. All right. I think the first question, Aicha, is actually to you. So someone asked, can I submit more than one project?
Definitely, they can submit more than one project. That's a good question, actually. If you have more than one project with .NET SDK, we don't have any rule or limitation about number of projects. As long as you're consuming Microsoft Graph .NET SDK, feel free to submit your projects and you might get a better chance of earning more prizes, maybe. That's a cool idea.
Who knows?
So I see another question. I will direct it to you, Waldek, and then we can jump into the technical questions. Is it okay if, let's say, I joined the hackathon and my teammate joined the hackathon today, like 8 days later? Is it okay to register 8 days later?
Definitely. You can join us whenever you want, as long as you submit your app by the end of day, March 15, Wednesday next week. You can join anytime. hack away, submit your hack, join us, let us know, show everybody what you've built, and we're excited to see your hacks.
Awesome. So let's get started. Our first question, and feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We are checking the chat live, and we are here to answer your questions too. We have a list of questions as well. The first question is to Justin. Justin, can we log into Azure portal with personal account, or do we need school or work account to use Microsoft Azure?
That's really good question, actually. So the simple answer is yes, you can. So as long as your personal account is Microsoft account, then you can log in with Azure portal. But remember this, being able to log in to Azure portal doesn't necessarily mean you can use Azure. So you need to have Azure subscription associated with your personal account.
Awesome, cool. And do you know if Azure give any free credits for the new users? And if, let's say, we are trying something out, can we have some free subscriptions for the first time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. So when you sign in to Azure, then with your new the Microsoft account, you will be able to get the free credits, about $200 or something. So that's for enough to try. But also, again, remember that you need a credit card details for the identification purpose. So if your credit card was previously used, I don't think you can use that card again. So try another credit card to avoid some sort of confusion.
Perfect. All right, next questions are actually for Brian. Brian, we just heard that you could use personal account, right? If you wanted to use Microsoft Graph for personal account, do you still need to create an AAD app?
Excellent question. So yes, you can use Microsoft Graph for kind of non-business scenarios, whether it's kind of for personal, for work, or for school kind of things. You do still need to have an Azure AD application for that. So you'll still go through the same types of set up the application. You'll still go in and set up the different types of permissions or the consents that you want to have for that. Do you have access to your files? Do you have access to your calendar? Do you have access to other kind of things like that? So those will still be required, whether you're doing this for excuse me, work and school, or if you're doing it for personal uses as well.
Perfect. And there was another thing. So thinking more about auth. What kind of accounts can you also use? Can you use ADFS, which is a lot of used a lot in the enterprises, or do you need to have AAD account?
Good question. You do need to have an Azure AD account to be able to log in with this. If you have ADFS, which is Active Directory Federation Services, typically this is for on-prem scenarios where I have, my enterprise, and we're going to federate basically with the cloud in terms of my account exists here and in the cloud. That used to be an option for doing different kind of things for SharePoint or for Exchange or things like that. Unfortunately, with Graph, though, we are only allowed to authenticate using Azure AD. So you have to have essentially the cloud version of that for your representation. Gotcha.
Cool. Another thing that we've seen people do a lot in the hack is asking, is it only or can you only build interactive apps, or can you also build daemon apps, like apps that are non-interactive, services that run in the background, and like can you also get a token for them without user interaction?
Excellent question. Yeah, you can actually do both scenarios. So we have support for both interactive applications as well as non-interactive applications. When you look at the documentation, you can see under our graph references, you'll see stuff for interactive, also called delegated, which is this application is going to act on your behalf. So we can actually go and access, again, your files, your plans, your tasks, your other kind of things that exist inside of Microsoft 365 and the consumer services and so forth. So interactive and delegated is definitely one scenario. We also do support non-interactive, or we also call application or app only. You'll see kind of different terms out there. But that's where, hey, there is no user in the mix for this. As you mentioned, could be a backend service. Maybe it's going to run nightly and go and get, again, your files, your emails, your whatever else. Do some kind of backend processing for that. It'll wake up, do its thing, and then kind of go back to sleep. But there's no user prompting there. There's no one actually sits at a keyboard, types in their password, or does their MFA, anything like that. It's all happening non-interactively, or that app-only kind of scenario. So both of those totally supported with Microsoft Graph, and great ways to actually be able to go and integrate with that.
Excellent. Final question about auth. So far at least. Can you tell us a bit more about the consent? Because that's something that came up a few times. Like, what is the consent? Like the first time you use an app, you see this page asking you to consent access. Like, what is that thing about?
Absolutely. The way I like to think about this is we have both the application itself, but then there's also the user who's going to be using that application out there. What we do is we take essentially the intersection, what can the app do and what can the user do? And that's those two together, what we call effective permissions. So who's going to be able to do what with the application inside of the system? The way I like to kind of draw a parallel is, most folks, they have a smartphone or something like that. You install an app on there, maybe you go to a website and you want to access some kind of services. They'll prompt you for, hey, can I access your contacts? Can I access your files? Can I access your email? Can I access whatever else? That application, you need to provide your consent that, yes, you can actually go and read that for me and now display it in your app, in your mobile app, in your website, whatever else it might be. So the process of you getting that little pop-up that says, here are the 3 things that this app wants to do, that's basically you providing yes, I'm okay with you actually going to access that, or no, I'm not. And therefore, that app would not be able to if you did the decline on that. But that whole process of providing your consent for that now means that this application on your behalf can actually go and access those resources that you have explicitly defined for that. If in the future they decide to change that and they want to add more permissions, they would have to reprompt you for that. So, if you add something over time, that's kind of what we call incremental consent, where they may actually prompt just for your profile in the beginning. Maybe they want to add something else in the future to unlock more features, or you've upgraded your plan with them. Otherwise, you can kind of get more access to things.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. So we have one question in the chat I want to drop in this discussion, actually. So it's asking, anyone has a sample with .NET 7 and Graph SDK 5. As you know, Graph SDK version 5 is new, so I'm sure they're looking for a couple of samples. Justin, today you're going to show us a sample with .NET 7 and Graph SDK version 5, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Awesome. And Maisa, do you know if there is other samples available anywhere that we can share in the chat? Maybe also our audience can take a look.
Sure. Yeah, we have some tutorials under the Microsoft Graph website that can help folks to go through some steps and create a client and things like that. So for sure, we can share.
Okay.
And actually, the templates that we have in the repo are also .NET 7.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So I have one question to Maisa. Is there any way to tell Azure Active Directory to allow all the requests from Microsoft Graph? And how can we do that? The only way of doing that, is it a global administrator to have allowing individual permissions, or is there any way to allow them all together?
Yeah, so no, there isn't a way to allow everything and every permission we have on the graph. And to be honest, I believe you also don't want to do it, because as we mentioned in the last Hack Together session, permissions are there to help you control what your application does, what the kind of data your application consumes and reads, and the things, the actions that your application want to do. So you want to be intentional to what permissions you include in your application. And then some of those you can do by your own, because it doesn't require an admin to go and consent. So you can have access to that data under your tenant. But some of other applications, you will need an IT admin to go and consent for you.
Thank you for clarification. Another question about the Graph Explorer, and we've seen a demo from Scott Hanselman, as well as we've seen demo from Rabeb. But there's an interesting question about Graph Explorer that one of the participants were asking. I'm seeing another tab called Toolkit component between code snippets and adaptive cart. What is that for?
So Toolkit is a UI web component that you can use in your application. So for example, we have the person's card that you can use in your own application to show informations from people in your tenant, their names, their photo, and all of that. So we provide to you these informations that you can copy and paste into your application and take advantage of those.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you, Maisa.
Perfect. Yes. So let's move to another one. Going back to Brian. Will Microsoft Graph, support Microsoft Planner, Forms, To Do, and OneNote?
Great question. We actually support a lot of different services within Microsoft 365 on Microsoft Graph. We kind of consider the de facto place if you're building APIs to go and release them. So with that, we do support Planner already. We already have To Do on there and OneNote. Unfortunately, Forms is not one that we directly support. So if you're looking to go and get like your surveys and other things that have been sent in there, there's not yet an API for that. The other ones do have APIs available. The last piece that I'll kind of caveat in there is that we do actually have a number of different reporting use cases that Forms does have some data coming out of there. So for like the application itself, how many users are assigned to it and things like that, there are a couple pieces. But other than that, the majority of the services available through Microsoft 365, again, SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, Planner, Azure Active Directory, To Do, OneNote, a lot of those ones that we mentioned out there, those are all supported and already have things available that you can go and test today.
Cool.
I have one extra question.
Yeah, go.
From the chat, because it is about the APIs. Thanks, Brian, for explaining all the available APIs. There's a question in the chat asking if Microsoft Graph API provides Teams messages access as well, because Swami is trying to get Teams messages, and he mentions that if this is protected or if they can easily get the Teams messages by using Microsoft Graph API.
Do you want me to take this one too?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. So yes, we do have support for Microsoft Teams, and you can get access to a lot of different endpoints for that, whether it's the Teams themselves, the chat messages, the configuration of apps, and so forth. One thing you may notice is there are a few small subset of those Microsoft Teams APIs that are what we consider protected APIs. And it's mainly around the sensitivity of the data itself. If you think about it, I'm having a conversation with Waldeck, with Aicha, with Maisa, and so forth. Some of that content that's in there, that might be confidential information because it is essentially basically the chats that I'm having with that person or with a group of people. So we do have an extra layer of, can insert some security on there. We do ask that people fill out, there's a protected APIs form. And that is specifically for those subset of Teams APIs to make sure that they're being used for the proper purposes, and that will basically list those apps to then go into those APIs. So if you take a look at our documentation, we'll try and find a link that we can put into the chat window for this. But if you fall into that category, there is that form that you can fill out. We've got a pretty quick turnaround on that, usually within less than a week or so, to be able to get that approved and going forward. But for most cases within Teams, most of those things are fine to use just by themselves. It's only when you're trying to say, give me every single chat message in the entire tenant, that kind of level of access, where you're going to have some additional kind of security things to make sure for.
We have another question in the chat about Planner. I also want to ask this, not sure who can answer, but is there a way to set up a webhook for a Planner checklist item being ticked?
Do we collectively notice? Is there a webhook?
That is an excellent question. We can probably try and answer here within the next few minutes as we do some little song and dance.
We'll get back to this.
Yeah. Okay, let's get back to this, and we can drop a link in the chat as well when we find out.
Perfect.
Awesome.
With that, one more question to Brian, being the most popular person on the experts. Is Graph API extensible? Because as many things as it has to offer, there's always willingness to do more. Like, imagine that in my org, I want to store favorite fruit for everybody on the team. Can I do that on Graph? can I add the data to it, or how would that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually get this pretty frequently. There are two different ways that you can actually extend the data that's already available in Microsoft Graph. At its core, we already have information for SharePoint, Exchange, for Planner, for tests, and so forth. That's kind of just like the base data that's already in there. If you want to extend that, though, there's kind of two options for this. They're both what we call extensions of the data. And the two flavors are either open extensions or schema extensions. Open extensions, as the name kind of implies, this is really, you get to put a key value pair that you want to add, and it's very flexible as to how you want to store that data, what you want to put into there. We basically just give you kind of property bags that you can go and update information and store that directly on Graph. That's then retrievable. You can go and use it in your processing and so forth. So that's for open extensions. The other option is what we call schema extensions. And this is more for, I want to take the existing data structure that's available with, let's say, my mail or from my user profile or something else. And you can literally add new attributes, again, kind of key value pairs, but I can literally extend the existing schema that exists within Graph. And then that, you can update it, you can read it, you can go and list it and so forth. But it's directly part of the schema itself within your tenant. So both of those options are available. And we do see a lot of our different customers and partners building solutions that make use of that for both open and schema extensions.
Perfect.
Awesome. I want to highlight one more question from the chat. So Sabi is asking about the licensing for Microsoft Graph. Is there any license that they need to be aware of about Microsoft Graph, or is it free? Can someone tell us which type of license they should have to use Microsoft Graph?
I can take this one if you'd like to.
Perfect.
Yeah, feel free to.
So for any user to be able to call into Microsoft Graph, they must have some form of licensing for Microsoft 365. It could be that they're a guest user in the tenant. It could be that they have a E1, E3, E5, an A1, A3, A5. Again, there's multiple different licenses that are out there. You have to have some form of license to be able to call in. So there's no quote unquote free access to Microsoft Graph, but in like 99% of the use cases, it'll be included in your user licensing. That said, there are a handful of APIs endpoints that do require something in addition to that. They may require a very specific type of license. We have some of our eDiscovery APIs, which those do require like an E3 or an E5. There's a few of our Azure AD reporting endpoints that require like the Azure AD Premium 1 or Premium 2 license. So those are a few very, very small use cases that are out there. We try our best to document those as in the documentation. And we also did just release a set of documentation updates within the last week or two, actually, that do address some of the other scenarios to try and list out all the different endpoints that require that licensing. It's not 100% complete. We're working on getting into there, but do take a look at the documentation. You can go and find out which ones do fall into that category of it requires a license to call.
Yes, and follow-up question to Waldek. Let's say that I'm a developer and I'm not sure if I will continue building with M365 or Graph. Do I have to have all these licenses, or is there any way that I can, try testing out about Microsoft Graph?
Very short, no. You don't need to buy an E3, 5, A1, A2. You don't need any of that, right? So the cool thing, the short answer is no. The longer one is you can use the Microsoft 365 developer program to get a free tenant for dev purposes, right? So you can use that. As long as you use it, you will be able to use it as long as it's in use, right? So as long as you use it to build your apps, develop things, you can use it without any cost, right? So you will get a dev tenant for you to be able to use it to build your app. And the cool thing is that tenant comes with demo users, demo content. So it's not an empty shell. There is content in there that allows you to develop your app against. And you can add to it your own users and content, whatever makes sense in the context of your app. Now, the next step is, imagine that you build your app and you also want to run a piece of it on Azure. So you need a database, infrastructure, serverless. That thing will cost you money. But the M365 developer tenant will not. So that part is for free for dev purposes only.
Sounds great. So my next question to Justin. Justin, can we build .NET apps using Visual Studio Code? Because traditionally, we've been using Visual Studio while building .NET apps, but one of the participants were wondering if VS Code is a place they can also use.
Oh, yeah, that's a really great question. So I used to use the Visual Studio only because I'm using the Windows machine. But the Visual Studio Code is nowadays .NET is the running cross-platform. So if you are the building an application on Windows or Mac or Linux box, and they are all using the running the Visual Studio Code. So you can actually write any code on the Visual Studio Code using .NET.
Wow, perfect. Okay, so there's a chance to use .NET with Visual Studio Code, and I think that's a great place to discover as well. If you're a .NET developer and if you're a traditional Visual Studio user like myself, Visual Studio Code has great goodies for .NET nowadays, so that's a good place to take a look.
That's right. So for example, so I'm using the Windows machine at home, and I'm bringing my MacBook laptop for the cafe work. And I also used GitHub Codespaces, which is based on the Ubuntu machine, which is Linux. So I use the 3 different places using Visual Studio Code for .NET application development.
Yes, definitely. Great example, by the way. GitHub Codespaces is also another of my favorite. I have another question. I think this is more of an open format question. Why .NET is a great language to build apps for work or school? And I know you have a really funny answer for that.
Actually, the first of all, I need to clarify what you refer as a .NET. So strictly speaking, .NET is not a programming language, actually. So .NET comprises 3 major programming languages, such as C#, F#, and Visual Basic. So, but on the other hand, .NET is rather a framework that developers can easily build an application quickly and efficiently. So if you think C# as a .NET, actually C# is one of the greatest object-oriented programming language to build applications, from desktop applications to mobile applications and web applications. So to build those applications, .NET Framework provides thousands of built-in features, including authentications and authorizations. So Microsoft Graph SDK is a part of this .NET Framework. So with this SDK, you can easily build an application and integrate with existing Microsoft 365 solutions seamlessly. So another good example of you need to use .NET the framework or .NET SDK is that .NET has large developer communities and ecosystems. Therefore, you can use it at work and school with many support directly from Microsoft or your local developer communities.
Perfect. All right, we've got some more questions, and now we've got a few to Andrew. Andrew, what are some cool new features in Graph.NET SDK that help developers build apps?
Oh yeah, I think that's a nice question. With the Graph SDK, you can it helps us build apps. One of the features I would mention is the page iterator. So what we see is when you're trying to call Graph and you're trying to access a collection, typically the Graph API will just return to you a subset of the results and a link to the next page. So using that, you could probably take that and use the page iterator so that it keeps on invoking and fetching the next results that are coming for you over and over until you get to the end of all the data that you want. So if you're fetching messages or you're fetching the list of users in your tenant, you could probably use this feature. It also allows you to pass in custom actions so that on the processing of each item, you could probably maybe send the data over to a data store or write it to a file, and allows you to integrate those custom actions. The other maybe cool feature I would mention is that in the event of uploading large files, the SDK is also has a feature, what we call the large file upload task, where you can probably pass in a huge file. You're trying to upload a large file that's gigabytes in size to OneDrive. It will split the file for you and slowly and surely in small chunks send it over to OneDrive, and you'll be able to get that done for yourself.
Cool. So these are like two great features that makes it so much easier for you as a dev when you want to deal with big files, or you want to get a lot of the data from Graph, like making it easier for you so that you don't need to get in business in building requests and parsing responses and sticking things together and breaking them apart. No, you can just focus on building your app and solving the problems for the customers, as opposed to plumbing and reinventing the wheel, right? So that is a cool thing to keep in mind. And then another one someone asked is .NET evolves over time, right? We are now I think in preview of .NET V8. We are now on LTS V7. So how does the new Graph.NET SDK makes use of some of the recent investments in .NET?
Yeah, so with regards to the recent investments, you could probably, one of the things I'd mention is the .NET multi-app platform, UI, MAUI. So with the new version of Graph SDK, you can use MAUI to probably build apps across various platforms on Android, Windows, macOS, and the rest. So with this, it makes it easier for a user of the SDK to deploy one single source code and make calls to Graph, whether it's from a client app or wherever. The other thing maybe I'd also mention is right now, for the sake of also developer experience, the SDK also takes advantage of like nullable reference types. So you can't be able to have like less error-prone code because now you have that information of whether or not something can be null or it can't be. So to reduce those null reference errors. We also do take advantage of like system.text.json for serialization, which is a recent .NET investment, and it makes the whole serialization and deserialization process faster, and it's also part of the entire .NET framework.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Definitely very cool. So a couple questions from the chat. I think Moisa can take this. Does Graph Explorer show all available endpoints, or can I find more information somewhere else?
Yeah, so Graph Explorer has a sample tab that you can see some samples, as the name. So you can see some of the endpoints that we have. You can call some of those using the demo tenant that we have for you in the Graph Explorer, or you can log in into your account and get data from your own user. But we do have the Resource Explorer tab, which is new, that you can see all the endpoints and all the resources that are available in Graph. So yes, you can see everything that is available in Graph Explorer in this resource tab, and you also can access the Microsoft Graph documentation website that you can go over all the endpoints, and you can see all the documentation around the APIs that we have there, what you can accomplish with those, and also see code snippets that we have there, and how you can use that endpoint to call in your application. And of course, C#, it's one of the languages that you can see both in Graph Explorer Code Snippets tab and in the API reference documentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Moisa. And one tricky question to Waldek. Can I submit a project I've completed before the Hack Together event? That's tricky.
It depends. If it's 2 days before, yes. If it's 2 years, maybe it's a little bit too old. Right. So yes, give it a try. If anything else, it's a great way to inspire others and share your ideas and maybe get feedback and suggestions to how you would modernize it, right? So share away. Let's give it a try. Who knows? You might have a winning hack.
Awesome. So my next question is for Justin. Justin, what's your favorite hack with .NET and Microsoft Graph? I know you have something to show us today.
Ooh, that's my favorite part. So, so can I share my screen?
Sure.
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the blog post that I wrote in 1.5 years ago, and that uses actually .NET 5 and GraphX SDK version 4 or something, so which is quite old. So and it uses Blazor WebAssembly and Azure Static Web App, and it is calling the Azure Functions backend API to make make the Graph API call. So it's as I said, it's old. So I now changed updated into a new one, the one. So this is the one. So I will share this the GitHub repository here. So you will be able to see this one. So it's basically use Blazor WebAssembly, which is hosted on as well the static website as a hosted the static web hosted Blazor WebAssembly application, which is calling the backend API. Backend as a functions API, that as a functions API actually calls Microsoft Graph, the API. So what I'm trying to do is that, so let me share. So this is the Visual Studio Code application. So when you host this application and onto this Blazor WebAssembly application onto the Azure Static Web App, and actually Static Web App uses easy authentication. So you don't have to worry about the implementing all those the complicating the OAuth scenarios here. But there is one the question here, because the easy auth uses only stores only your email address as a login information, but that doesn't necessarily mean you belong to a certain tenant. So there's no it doesn't say anything about where your tenant is and where your application is actually hosted, or which tenant you are calling Microsoft Graph API. So it really undercomplicated because you only have the email information. So to understand which tenant you are you belong to, then you need to call the Graph API with the client ID and client secret using the client secret authentication process. So this is actually the one. So when you see the client principal, which is this is a backend Azure Functions API application. So when the Blazor, the static web application calls the backend the Azure Functions API, it sends a request header keys in x-ms-client principal, and it actually contains these values like identity provider, the user ID, user details, and user roles. That user details is actually pointing to your email address, and nothing there. So there's no tenant information. There's nothing. So we have to rely on this email address and call your like a profile data by calling the graph Microsoft Graph or something like that. So this is this code is what actually doing. So initially, in version 4, it uses a different approach. But in here, we use simply the newer version of the version 5 of Graph API uses client secret credential from the Azure.identity and NuGet package. So which is way easier and way intuitive than before. So thanks to the Microsoft Graph SDK team, I really appreciate it. It is way easier than before. So anyway, so I call the users data and check the user UPN with my email address. So if it is there, then it will show the logged in information. If it doesn't exist, it will show, where is it? So it doesn't, it will show, you are not in this tenant or something like that. So let me show you how this works. So I will start the static web application locally here. Then, oops, not this one. So, yeah, it takes time. But anyway, so I built this application in here, and it will showing this tenant. So as you can see, so it will be running in my local machine here. So I will show that for some sort of thing. So while we are waiting, okay, so we have the local host 4280, which is locally running my the SOA application. Then if I click login button here, and it shows the mocking the information. So if I use the Microsoft the email address, and then it will showing me, so it will be changing. So not using this tenant because I use this different tenant. So if I instead, if I change this into something different, so let's say instead of using Justin.yoo at M365 dev here, which is I'm using this one, then it will show me that you are in actually the right tenant, something like that. Right.
Cool.
So I actually deployed this into the as a static web app, and here this is the one. So that's the running on my work account. So I'm doing the same thing. So if I log into there, and it will be showing the same style. You are not on the right tenant. So it takes time, and then your usually it's not the right tenant. But if I use different one, if I log into different one, which is I'm using the M365 DevKR, so then it will be showing the right information, something like that. So it really depends on which the tenant ID and client ID and client secret is using. Then you will be able to see the Blazor WebAssembly application is collecting your right information based on the login information on the Azure Static Web Apps EasyAuth.
Cool.
So that's
very cool.
That's my end of my demo.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is very cool to see. Aita, do we have any more questions? I believe we do.
We do. Yes. So Stefan's question, feel free to take it.
Yeah. Let me scroll back. Or is it already showing on a screen? No, it's not yet.
Yeah, let me put.
So that is a question to Maisa. Does the Graph SDK, and I believe that he mentions or he refers to Graph.NET SDK v5, work in Blazor WebAssembly? Then you would no longer need to build a proxy to call Graph.
Yeah, so yes, it does. But the short answer would say it's easier for now to use Microsoft Graph.NET v4 because we do have a library that's called identity.web that can help you with the authentication flow and all of that, and will abstract a lot of the complexity from your code. But unfortunately, we are still working to update this library to v5. So you can access, for example, the template that we have in the Hack Together repo. You will see that we have a template for Blazor, and we are using the identity web library, which is targeting v4. But we are working to get this updated to v5. We promise we will have this soon as possible. But if you want to, you can go and use .NET v5 directly and build and abstract all the code that you need and use v5 to build a Blazor application.
Thank you, Maisa. Awesome. So we have one more question. Let's try to answer. And I'm looking at Brian. If someone is using client ID and secrets for Microsoft Graph and Azure Function, how can we merge, or we have to use different client ID and secrets for both of them?
Good question. I hope I'm understanding this properly. If you have multiple different applications and multiple secrets for different sets of kind of logins for this, how could you be able to either use the same one across multiple of them, or maybe increase security for this? I'll say when you authenticate with Microsoft Graph, there are kind of two options for doing that authentication check on there. One is with client ID and secret. The other is with client ID and a certificate. ID, just think of this as like a cryptographically long type of password that the app is going to use to log into that. You can actually have multiple client secrets that are assigned to the same application out there. And you may actually distribute those to different sets of users, different applications, and they might have different life cycles for them too. One might be only valid for 30 days, while one's good for 2 years. Really depends on like what type of security you're trying to put in place, what type of segmentation or kind of key rotation for this. The nice part is that we're completely using Azure AD behind the scenes to manage all of this. So it does support the ability to create a key and then create another key and then create another key. You don't have to update that in your application until you're ready to go and do that. We kind of call this key rotation or credential rotation. So it's a good idea that, hey, if one expires in 30 days, how can I flip over to the new one? Well, go and create it ahead of time, then put it into the application when you're ready to actually go and update that. So in terms of merging keys together, totally possible to do that if that's what you want from a security standpoint or from the authentication standpoint. So I hope I'm understanding the question correctly. If not, please feel free to put it into the chat and we can try and help answer that.
Yeah, so let me take another take on that. That might be what the person meant. So imagine that I have an Azure function secured with AAD. And then in the function, I want to call Graph. Can I do it in one go, or do I need to have a separate AAD app for the function and then another one to do app only to Graph? Or can I do it in one go, like you're using one AAD app for both and then have end-to-end flow?
Good question. I know there is the capability of what they call managed identities, where you could literally say, my function, it has its own identity literally within inside of Azure AD. I actually haven't looked in to see what's the latest on that, if we support managed identity for logging into Microsoft Graph. That would be where I would start to look, at least from a starting point. And that way you could say that, hey, the function is going to spin up and run and do whatever it needs to. The function itself has an identity that they can then go and access things on my behalf within the tenant. So unfortunately, I don't know off the top of my head, but that's where I would start kind of looking from a research standpoint.
Perfect.
Thanks, Brian. So there's one follow-up question from Stefan to Maisa. If I want to use V5, .NET SDK V5, do I have to handle getting the token myself?
So the Microsoft Graph SDK helps you to get the token when you're authenticating with Graph, and you can use what we have and the middlewares that we have to help you with that. So you can create a client, you can get a token. We are using identity libraries to authenticate under the covers. So you can take advantage of what we have in the .NET V5 to get the token, authenticate yourself, and build your application.
Perfect. And I see another question in a chat. Can I call the Graph API from an Office add-in? Who wants to take that one? If no one else, I will. 3, 2, 1. Anybody?
Go ahead.
Yes, you can. You can, right? So in Office, you could build already Office web add-ins for a long time. I think 7 years or so, and already. So for all that time, you were able to call the Microsoft Graph and get the data from there. I don't know the latest state about the latest Microsoft Graph JavaScript SDK and how would that work in there, but like overall, the ability is there. Yes, you can call the Microsoft Graph basically from any type of app, whether that's an Office add-in, SharePoint web part, mobile app, serverless, whatever app you would build on whatever platform and language, you can call the Microsoft Graph.
Thanks,
Perfect.
Waldek.
With that out of our way, I think it's time to get back for a minute or two, maybe to our hacks. Brian, you are not on the list. What is your favorite hack with .NET and Microsoft Graph? And you can pick only one.
I will actually pick a pet project of mine that I worked on with one of my teammates, Jason Johnson, who does a lot of our content development stuff. Last October or so it was, I think. We actually wanted to see, is it possible to put together .NET Interactive, it's actually now called Polyglot Notebooks, together with Microsoft Graph. And turns out that actually, yeah, we put together a prototype to go and do this. The idea, if you're not familiar with the Polyglot Notebooks and the kind of Jupyter Notebooks scene, you can actually have these notebooks, usually for data science stuff. But what they do is you can have markdown text alongside runnable code. So think of it almost like taking the Graph Explorer, kind of the snippets that are in there, but make those runnable literally inside the browser. And so what we have put together, at least now, is there is a preview version of an extension where you can have a .NET Interactive notebook and have Microsoft Graph SDKs, for now just the .NET one, but you can actually run that directly inside of there, and it'll handle a whole bunch of the auth plumbing code for you and kind of the back-end stuff. So you could literally copy-paste snippets from Graph Explorer and have them runnable in your own local notebook. So We'll put a link to that here in the comments. But that's my favorite hack right now for .NET and Graph together.
That sounds very, very cool. Yeah, and I can't wait to see it in practice because it sounds very, very cool. Like as you say, the ability to have runnable code in the browser, where it's like maybe next to docs, or maybe there's a piece of code you want to run and you just want to see it work without standing up a new app, doing auth, like just see the same thing work. Like, that is perfect.
Yep.
Aisha, do you want to take another one?
Yeah, so up next, Andrew. What is your favorite hack, Andrew, with .NET and Microsoft Graph?
So for me, I'd say it's something that's just so recently that's now part of the SDK. So I believe it's Stefan who noticed that our SDK right now, with regards to the batch requests, has this limitation where you'd only have to put like 20 requests at a time so that the batch request could be sent over to Graph API. So the contribution involved removing that limitation, and now the SDK users with the newest release can now put in as many requests as they can, and then the SDK now will automatically handle that limitation from the API end and let you just get the responses without worrying about whether or not you need to slice everything up.
That's pretty cool. Thanks, Andrew. And this is a part of the SDK right now, right?
Yeah, so it was a contribution that was made, and now it should be part of the SDK. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think we only have Moise left, right, Waldek?
Yes. What is your favorite hack? I'm curious. Like the bar is really high now.
Yeah, so the thing is, Andrew stole my favorite hack, because my favorite hack is what he was mentioned. It was a contribution from Stefan to our SDK. It was a project that he submitted to Hack Together, and we saw it. We saw the potential, and it was super interesting how Stefan was doing things. So we decided to bring the implementation to the Graph Core library, and now we will have it supported in the Graph Core, and not only as an extension as it was before. So this is my favorite hack from the last few months, I would say.
Yeah, that is so cool. I mean, like we organize a hack, and then the next thing you know, people are improving our SDKs, and within a few days, their work is now merged into an SDK that is used by everybody in the world. How cool is that, folks? Like, if there's one thing that proves like the worth of do hack, like share your ideas, because next thing you know, you might end up in an SDK being used by everybody across the world who builds with Microsoft Graph and .NET. So that is really, really great example of how we can achieve more, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. We've got 2 minutes left. Unless there is one more burning question from the chat. There is a very good one that I will take live. Can we have all favorite hacks from all the panelists in one single chat so that we can learn from them? We can actually share all of them as a list, maybe with links in discussions. Aisha, what do you think? Would it work?
Let's definitely do that. In Hack Together discussions, we will share all the favorite hacks from this panel.
Perfect. All right. With a minute and a half until the end, I would like to thank every one of you experts who are here, shared your questions, like didn't shy away from even the hardest thing about auth. We found everything about tokens and accounts and permissions and scopes. We learned about really cool features that are available in the Microsoft Graph.NET SDK that helps developers focus on building the app, solving problems for the customers, and not spending time in plumbing. Right, so it's really cool to learn about all of that. So thank you all, Justin, especially to you, because it's, I think, 2 a.m. for you now. So really super thank you for being here and helping us help everybody in a hack. With that, can we share my screen, please, for just one more slide? Excellent.
Yes.
So as we already said a few times, and we will not stop saying that, it's not too late to join. You can join us anytime before March 15. Join whether alone or as a team. Submit a hack. Any hack is okay as long as it uses .NET and the Microsoft Graph .NET SDK. You qualify to win some of the cool prizes that we have to give away. Submit your hack by March 15. And who knows, you might be a winner. So with that, thank you all once again and see you on GitHub.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.